Zophar the Naamathite can't wait any longer. He thinks Job is not waiting for his third argument and is already coming to his conclusion. So he interrupts, insisting, "You all know the way it is. God destroys the wealth of the wicked. And even wisdom teaches you, Job, that you've sinned and known what's wrong." We'll consider Zophar the Naamathite's third final address as we open the book and think on these things. I am Nathan C. Johnson, Bible teacher. I greet you in the faith and fellowship of our great God and Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, whose we are, whom we love, and whom we serve. Turn with me today to the book of Job in chapter 27. And we'll be starting at verse 11. Now, as I suggested at the end of our last video, something strange happens here. Because Job starts out at the beginning of his chapter just swearing that he will never admit that his friends are right. And yet suddenly, he seems to turn around and admit his friends are right. What in the world? Now this puzzles many expositors. They scratch their heads. What's happening here? Well, I claim that what happens is that Job is interrupted. That Zophar, the Naamathite, cuts him off and begins his third address without waiting for him to finish his answer to Bildad. Now, so far through this whole argument, Job and his three friends have been speaking very formally. One will make his address to Job and give his viewpoint. And then Job will give his answer and his response. And then the next one will make his address to Job and give his viewpoint. And then Job will answer and give his response, and so forth. Now, the last one we saw, Bildad, gave his third address, and he seemed kind of unprepared. It was only 6 verses, and it was a pretty lame argument. Like, he didn't have anything to say, but it was his turn, so he did the best he could. But Job demolishes it easily. As we saw, Bildad had a glass jaw. He hadn't been so righteous. And he's claiming that Job is suffering because he wasn't righteous, and Job says, look in the mirror, Bildad. But Job is going on and insisting, swearing that he's not righteous, and Zophar's turn ought to be next. And he's getting more and more upset by what Job is saying, and so he doesn't wait for Job to finish. He just breaks in and interrupts him. Now, Job's argument continued from chapter 27 and verse 1 to verse 10. And verse 10 was not a conclusion. Job was not done with his response to Bildad, but Zophar breaks in and interrupts. And so because it is an interruption, there is no formal introduction to Zophar and stating that he is giving his third address. No, we just have Job's words end at the end of verse 10 and Zophar's words start at the beginning of verse 11 because Zophar breaks in. But that confuses people since there is nothing to show that Job stopped talking and Zophar started. And so it makes a lot of people think that Job is still speaking, but then, of course, we have the problem of in the beginning of the chapter he says he'll never admit his friends are right, and then at the end of the chapter he says they're right. Well, obviously, it's not Job speaking, it's Zophar speaking. And Job would not have sworn at the beginning of the chapter that he'll never admit they're right, and then admit they're right a few words later. These words are only understandable if we attribute them to Zophar. Now, Bullinger in his companion Bible gives a series of reasons as to why this must be Zophar's third address. Number 1, it is required by the structure and to complete the symmetry of the book. Of course, if Zophar doesn't speak here, he has no third address, so there's an address missing. There's a hole. Everyone else, Eliphaz, Bildad, they all did 3 addresses. Why did Zophar only do 2? Number 2, the sentiments of chapter 27, verse 11 through chapter 28 and verse 28 demand it. For they are the very opposite of Job's, and the same as Zophar's in 27:13 compared to 20 verse 29. Number 3, if these are Job's words, then his friends had convinced him, which Elihu declares they had not done in Job 32 and verse 12. Number 4, the Hebrew of Job 29 and verse 1 does not mean continued. Job continued his discourse, but added to take up his discourse, which may mean conclusion as well as continuance. So Job wasn't continuing in chapter 29. He was taking up his discourse where he left it off when Zophar so rudely interrupted. Number 5, it marks off and separates 29:1 through 31:40 from Job's ordinary replies. Instead of replying to Zophar, Job utters his self-justification in 29:1 through 31:40, which corresponds with his lamentation in 3:1 through 26 and forms the conclusion, as that had been the introduction, and prepares us for the words of Job are ended in 31:40. And then number 6, Kennicott, Bernard, and Wolfson assign a third address to Zophar. Well, I suppose in the days Bullinger was writing, those were known names. Nobody knows them maybe now. But he says, I'm not the only one who thinks this is Zophar's third address. He's not alone in thinking that. And I agree with him. I think this is Zophar rather clearly. And he breaks in here and gives his third address, which is the opposite of what Job thinks. And that's why the beginning of chapter 27 is saying the opposite as the end of it. Because this is Zophar, starting in verse 11. He interrupts Job and gives his third address. Now, Zophar's root interruption, his third address, starts out with God destroys the wealth of the wicked in verse 11. And again, I'm reading this in Bullinger's translation. I now would speak about the ways of God, and Shaddai's dealings with you not conceal. So here's where Zophar breaks in and doesn't let Job finish his argument. Job left off with a question. He obviously had more to say in verse 10, but Zophar breaks in. Now he claims he can't take this anymore. Job just demolished Bildad, as we saw. He can't take this anymore. He wants to speak about the ways of El, the mighty God, and Shaddai, the all-bountiful, the all-giving one. He has dealings with you. He says, I'm not going to conceal. I'm going to show you what God is doing. You think you know what God is doing, but I'm the one who really knows. I'll tell you. Verse 12, ye surely must have seen them for yourselves, or are ye then so altogether vain? So he says, ye. And remember, in Old English, we don't have a singular and plural you anymore. But in Old English, ye and you were the plurals, and thou and thee were the singulars. So he says, ye, you plural. So he means Job and his other friends. Well, you must have seen these things for yourselves. You must have seen what God's dealings are like. He says, are ye then so altogether vain? Are you so empty that you haven't even noticed how God acts? I know how he acts. You must already know it. Verse 13, this is the lot of wicked men from God, the oppressor's heritage from Shaddai's hand. So he says this. And what does he mean by this? Well, what happened to Job, of course? What happened to Job? Why, that's the lot, that's the portion, that's the inheritance that wicked men get from El. That's just what you'd expect the mighty God to do to them. This is the oppressor's heritage. An oppressor ends up like you, Job. Shaddai, the all-bountiful, he is bountiful to give out punishment like you got, Job. Verse 14, if sons do multiply, 'tis for the sword. Of bread his offspring will not have enough. So he says the wicked's sons. And the King James says children there, but it's the Hebrew benim, sons. If his sons multiply, if he has a lot of children, it's just for the sword. They'll just die a violent death. And we see here once again that Job's friends do not shy from stabbing Job where it hurts, from bringing up his poor dead children and using them to mock and hurt Job and accuse him. So his sons are just going to die a violent death like your sons did, Job. And even if they live, why, they won't have enough food. His offspring will be starving. They won't have enough food. Verse 15, their issue buried, killed by pestilence, their widows will not lamentation make. So the issue, the grandsons of the wicked, why, they will be buried, killed by pestilence. They'll be killed by disease. and their widows will not lamentation make. What does he mean? Why would the widows of a dead man not make lamentation for him? Well, the only reason would be because the widows are dead too. So not just his sons will die, but his daughters-in-law will die. They won't be able to make lamentation for their dead husbands because they will have died as well. So Zophar certainly does not shy away from stinging Job with what happened to his family. We can see once again the cruel hand of Satan behind the arguments of Job's three friends. They really were his finishing touch. Verse 16, though silver like the dust he heapeth up, and garments made in number like the sand. So this wicked one, exhibit A of wickedness, Job, in other words, he heaps up silver like dust. He has so much of it. He has garments in number like the sand. How many grains of sand are there? Well, that's how many garments this wicked one has. Then, verse 17, though he prepare, the just will put them on. His silver will the innocent divide. So he is preparing for his future, this wicked man. He's laying up for his future. And yet, as much as he tried to lay up for his future and prepare for himself, well, who will really put his garments on will be the just. The just will get those things the wicked thought to store up for himself. And then his silver will the innocent divide. The innocent will get those things. Well, who does Zophar think took Job's substance? Remember, these were foreign raiders. Were these foreign raiders innocent? Were they riding around on their camels and so forth with halos over their heads and these wonderful innocent raiders? I mean, who does Zophar think he's kidding when he tells Job this? Verse 18, the house he builds, 'tis frail as the moths, or as the booth which vineyard watcher makes. So he says he builds a house, but it's frail like a moth's house, like a cocoon. And remember, what had happened to Job's children again? Oh yeah, the house fell on them. Zophar is not shying away from really sticking it to Job. And we could just imagine the gleam of hatred in his eyes, and I think Job's friends really are acting hatefully towards him because they are just so desperate to insist that Job deserved this, because of course they want to believe that nothing like this could ever happen to them. So his triumph as he really sticks it to Job, their houses are frail like the moths. Whereas the booth which a vineyard watcher makes, someone who's watching over a vineyard, all he needs is a little covering for his head to keep the sun off of him. So he says his house is as flimsy as that. His house he thought he prepared for himself. Verse 19, he lies down rich, his wealth not gathered in. He openeth his eyes, and it is gone. So it's like when he goes to bed at night, he's rich. His wealth isn't gathered in, it's out in the fields awaiting for harvest time. But when he wakes up, opens his eyes, wakes up, it's gone. Oh, what happened? It's like my wealth was just a dream. It's gone. He said, just like you, Job. Like one day you went to sleep and you're rich, the next day you woke up and you're poor. That's what happens to wicked people, Job. Verse 20, terrors will overtake him as a flood. A whirlwind in the night will sweep him off. Well, Job has already admitted he's being terrified by dreams. He says, if I think I'll get relief from the horrible things that happened to me while sleeping, well, no, I'm terrified by awful dreams. And so Zophar grabs this and stabs Job with it. Yep, the wicked, he's overcome by terrors like a flood. And the wicked, a whirlwind in the night will sweep him off. And once again, remember, it was a wind that had destroyed the house where Job's children die. So he's really doubling down on hurting him over this. Verse 21, the east wind catcheth him, and he is gone. Yea, as a storm it hurls him from his place. So he says, the east wind blows the wicked one away. And like the storm wind, it hurls him out from his stable place. Now it's interesting as the argument goes on here, the mentions of storms. And I wonder, was a storm brewing? We know eventually Jehovah spoke to Job out of the storm. And so I wonder, was a storm brewing even as they were making these arguments? Well, I don't know. It's interesting that they mention the storm. He says the storm hurls him from his place. Verse 22, he who before was wont to flee from him will now come down on him and will not spare. So he was so mighty that others would flee from him. They wouldn't dare take him on. And yet now the one who formerly fled feels free to attack him and to not spare him because his power is gone. Well, just like Job's is gone. Verse 23, in triumph, he will clap his hands at him and hiss him forth from out his dwelling place. So the one who used to be afraid of him cheers over what happened to him and hisses him out of his dwelling place. You getting what you deserve, buddy. Well, this is what his friends had been doing to him. They had more or less been cheering what happened to Job and booing and hissing him out of his place. And Zophar is still convinced that Job must be wicked and accuses him of it. And once again, these could not be Job's words. If they were, he gave in and agreed with his friends. And Elihu testified that he never did. So this is Zophar speaking. Well, now we come to 28, and Zophar's address continues. Verse 1, yes, for the silver there exists a vein, a place withal for gold, which they refine. So Zophar is now trying to show his erudite wisdom. And he's starting a long illustration for wisdom, comparing it to a vein for silver and a mine for gold. So he's going to give this clever intellectual argument. So it talks about where the silver is found in a vein and the veins of gold, which they later refine. Verse 2, from out the earth iron may be brought up, and copper may be smelted from the ore. So the earth here, that's the soil. The same word for the dust or the topsoil from which God made man. In Genesis 2:7, he formed man of the dust of the ground or the topsoil of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Well, he says, from out of that topsoil, iron may be brought up, and copper may be smelted from the ore. Again, of course, the ore that was found under the earth. Verse 3, to darkness neath the earth man sets a bound. In all directions he explores beneath. So this, of course, is describing the digging of mine shafts and the exploration for hidden riches. So the darkness beneath the earth that seemed to be boundless, and yet man sets a bound upon it by digging down into it and bringing in light. He says to the darkness between the earth, you stop here, I'm bringing light here. And then he explores in all directions beneath. He's looking for more silver. He knows silver is found in this place. He's found maybe a vein, but it's tapped out. He's looking for more. He's going in all directions. Or maybe he's found a vein and he's following it. Yea, even the ores of earth and darkness hid. So this ore hid down in the darkness, he's uncovering it and bringing it to the light. Verse 4, a shaft he sinks, neath where the settler dwells. And there, forgotten by the well-worn way, the miners bore and pass away from sight. So this miner sinks a shaft beneath where the settler dwells, but beneath the homes of others. Their homes are sitting up on the surface. They have no clue. But the miner is seeking a shaft down below their dwelling. And they're forgotten by the well-worn way. I mean, the pathways on the surface are well-worn. People are constantly trotting them. And yet here these miners are deep down in the earth. They pass away from sight. You can't see them down there. They're traveling ways that other people don't know about. But that's where they travel, down, away from sight beneath the earth. Verse 5, as for the earth, bread cometh forth from it, yet underneath it, fire is stirred up. So as for the earth, bread comes forth from it, food in other words. The earth produces food on the surface. But interestingly, this same earth that produces bread on top, underneath it, there's fire. Well, that, of course, is true. We know now that the earth has a molten core and that it's very, very hot down in the center of the earth. So notice the advanced science of Job and his friends. They knew these things at this time. They were not backwards ancients. They understood things. Which people later perhaps forgot and had to rediscover. Verse 6, among its stones are glowing sapphires found, and in its dust are nuggets of pure gold. So among the stones under the ground are found glowing sapphires, precious stones. And in its dust, down in its soil, are nuggets of pure gold. Gold and precious stones are found down there in the earth. Verse 7, there is a path no bird of prey hath known, nor hath the eagle's eye discovered it. So the birds that fly above the earth, they can look down and see the paths of human beings. And the eagle's eye can discover even the most hard to see thing. And yet he says, no bird of prey knows these paths deep under the earth. No eagle's eye has discovered any traveler down there. No, down there beneath the earth they're hidden away. Verse 8. A path which no proud beast hath ever trod, nor e'en the lion ever passed that way. Now on earth a proud beast goes where he likes. And the lion, the king of beasts, he trods as he pleases. But no proud beast or lion has ever trod these pathways beneath the earth where the miners go. Now what they've translated here in the King James, the lion's whelps, that in Hebrew is the sons of pride. And indeed, the proud lion generally goes where he wishes, but he doesn't go into mines. Verse 9. Man lays his hand upon the flinty rock. The hills he overturneth by their roots. So this is what the miners do in the mine. On the flinty rock they lay their hand and overturn these hills by their roots. He's discovering the roots of the hills, he says, when he digs down there. Verse 10, he cutteth water channels in the rocks. His eye detecteth every precious thing. So, of course, as he digs through the earth, sometimes water comes down from the ceiling of the mine. So he digs channels for it. Of course, keep it from making everything wet where he's digging. And his eye detects every precious thing. He's trained. He can spot the signs of, oh, something's this way. Precious metal, precious stones. His eye detects these things. Verse 11, the overflowing floods he doth restrain. The hidden things he bringeth forth to light. So again, overflowing floods he restrains. He restrains waters from flooding his mines. When things deep down there hidden under the earth, he brings them to light. That's what the miner does. Verse 12, but wisdom, whence can wisdom be obtained? And understanding, where is found its place? So in contrast, these deep and hidden mines, the miners can bring up all these concealed things. But where is the mine where one could find wisdom? What's the way that one could go about mining wisdom? Could he mine it under the earth? No. Could he set up some way of retrieving it? No. No, not like the miner does. Verse 13, no mortal man doth know the way thereto. Among the living it cannot be found. No mortal man, and that's enosh, mortal man subject to death. No mortal man knows the way to wisdom, that he could mine a place for it. And then among the living it cannot be found. And that is the land of the living, Eretz, the land of the living. There's no place in the land of the living where this is the place of wisdom. You just go there and you can dig it up. Verse 14, the abyss exclaims, wisdom is not in me. And ocean roars, nor dwelleth it with me. Now the abyss, that means under the water's surface, like in Genesis 1:2, the darkness is on the face of the deep, the face of the abyss, the water under the surface. So wisdom is not found deep under the earth, it's not found deep under the water either, and it's not found in the ocean. Verse 15, fine gold cannot be given in its stead, neither can silver for its price be weighed. So you couldn't pay out gold in order to get wisdom. You couldn't weigh out silver and say, I paid enough, I can get wisdom now. No, he says you can't do that. Verse 16, with Ophir's gold it can never be bought, nor with the onyx or the sapphire gem. So again, you cannot buy wisdom with gold from Ophir. And Ophir was a land known for gold. Where exactly was Ophir? Well, it's an unknown region. Nobody knows for sure. Could be India. Could be Arabia. Some suggest Africa. But wherever Ophir was, it was known for gold. And he says you can't buy it with even fine gold from Ophir. Nor with onyx or the sapphire gem. These precious stones can't buy wisdom. Verse 17, crystal and gold cannot compare with it, nor vessels of pure gold be its exchange. So you can't compare crystal and gold with wisdom. Even finely wrought gold and vessels wouldn't be enough to pay for getting wisdom. Wisdom is more precious than these things. Verse 18, corals and pearls cannot with it be named. The worth of rubies wisdom far excels. So coral is expensive. No, not as expensive as wisdom. Pearls are precious. but pearls don't have the reputation wisdom does. Rubies have great worth, and yet wisdom excels the worth of rubies, he says. Verse 19, the topaz gem of Cush vies not therewith, and purest gold with it cannot be weighed. Now, Cush means black, and people think it was Africa, perhaps Ethiopia. Well, this is a place where topaz gems could be found. Cush was the son of Ham, by the way. So he says, the topaz gems, why, they aren't worth as much as wisdom. And purest gold, that's not worth as much as wisdom either. Verse 20, whence then this wisdom? Whence then doth it come? And understanding, where is found its place? So wisdom being so valuable, Zophar says, the question is then, well, where can you get it from? Where can you mine for understanding? Where's the place where you could find understanding? Verse 21, so hidden from the eyes of all who live, and from the birds of heaven so close concealed. So all who live find that the place of wisdom is hidden, just like living creatures find the minds hidden. And from the birds of the air, though they can seek out everything on the earth below them, they can't see wisdom from their high vantage point. Now, the air there, birds of the air, fowls of the air as it has in the King James Version, and that is the birds of heaven, as Bullinger has translated it. Verse 22, death and destruction both alike declare, the rumor of it hath reached our ears. So he personifies death. Now, death here is not Sheol, but destruction there is Abaddon. And we've suggested Abaddon, destruction, is death with no resurrection in view, whereas Sheol is death with resurrection in view. But he says death and Abaddon, destruction, both alike declare that they had heard a rumor of wisdom, but they don't know where it comes from. And he is being very poetic, giving death and destruction a say. Verse 23, God understandeth the way thereof, and he knoweth the place thereof. So Eloah, though, the venerable God who is worthy of worship, why, he understands the way to get wisdom, and he discerns the secret place where wisdom can be found. God knows. Verse 24, for he can look to earth's remotest bounds, and all beneath the heavens he beholds. So earth is also the land. He can see from one side of the land to the other. He can see from one side of the earth to the other. He can see everywhere, and he knows and understands where and how you can get and find wisdom. Verse 25, so that he gives the air its density, and waters meteth out by measurement. So he gives the air its density. He weighs out the air, is the way he puts it poetically, or the winds. But the Hebrew word is ruach, and ruach is often translated spirit, although it can also mean wind. So he weighs out the wind, and the waters he metes out by measurement. He measures out the waters. Now, waters are hard to measure, especially if you're using a tool. I mean, you try to use a wrench, you can find what wrench fits water. How do you measure water? Well, it's hard to measure, especially with tools for measuring solid things. But he can measure out water. Verse 26, when for the rain he issued a decree, a way appointed for the thunder flash. So he decrees the rain and the thunder, when it's going to rain, and he figures out how thunder works, the lightning. Verse 27, then did he see it, then declared it good, yea, he established it and showed it forth. So when he made all these things, appointing the rain and the thunder, weighing out the wind and the waters, when he did all these things, well, then he saw wisdom and gave it its established place in his order and showed it forth, displayed it for all to see, the great wisdom that God had. Verse 28, and to the sons of Adam thus he saith, lo, wisdom is to reverence the Lord, and understanding is to flee from sin. So Zophar comes to his conclusion. He says, to the sons of Adam thus he saith. The sons of man, the sons of Adam. Representatives of Adam. And that's what we all are. We're all descended from Adam. We're representatives of Adam's race. So he says this to us. Wisdom is to reverence the Lord, to respect the Lord. Now the Hebrew Bibles here read Adonai. But this is one of the 134 places where the Zopharim, the self-titled wise ones, who took it upon themselves to edit the Old Testament, where they changed the original Yehovah to Adonai for their own inscrutable purposes. So what Zophar originally said is that wisdom is to reverence Yehovah. And understanding is to flee from sin. If you really understand, you'll flee from sin. So this is Zophar's conclusion. He asks, what in the world did verse 28 have to do with anything? Well, what it had to do was this conclusion. See, this is his last barb against Job. Wisdom is to fear the Lord. So he says, Job, you must not have feared Yehovah, or this wouldn't have happened to you. Understanding is to flee from sin. Job, you must not have had enough understanding to flee from sin. If you were wise, if you were understanding like I am, you would have feared Yehovah and fled from sin, and then this wouldn't have happened to you. So what can we say about Zophar's argument here? Well, again, like I said, what does that have to do with anything, chapter 28? Not much. Zophar almost seems to make out that wisdom is a separate thing from God. God knows the way to it. God knows where it's found. God knows how to get it. Well, truly wisdom comes from God. God created wisdom. He doesn't have to find it like a miner. Kind of strange argument Zophar makes. I think that perhaps Zophar is trying to do something here, a trick in his argument, of sounding intellectual. Coming up with this grand and glorious ode to wisdom. And it's supposed to overwhelm Job with his intellect. And this is a method of arguing where you act like you're so much smarter than the person you're arguing with that he might as well just give up. Well, maybe your argument isn't really as good as his, but if you can convince him you're way smarter than he is, why, maybe he'll just bow to you. And clearly here Zophar implies that he has wisdom and Job does not. Well, Bullinger points out that while Job starts again in chapter 29, he doesn't really answer Zophar's last address. And again, Zophar broke the pattern and interrupted Job's argument, didn't wait for his turn. And so Job ignores his largely irrelevant argument, didn't really say anything new at all, he just tried to act intellectual. And then Job goes right on to his conclusion. And perhaps just ignoring Zophar's rude interruption is what he deserved after he interrupted Job. And indeed said nothing new or original, just tried to act smart. So in this portion we see that Zophar interrupts Job. He insists that Job and his friends ought to know that God always brings the wicked to ruin. Then he goes into a long aside to wisdom, about wisdom, trying to show apparently how smart he is. And he implies that real wisdom is to flee from sin, and that Job didn't flee from sin, so he must not be wise because this has happened to him. Well, Job ignores this rude interruption in his concluding arguments. We're out of time for today, so we'll take up Job's concluding arguments and his final statement starting in chapter 29 next time. If you've enjoyed this video, please press like below or comment. We'd love to hear from you, and it also helps promote our videos. Until we meet again around the pages of God's book, I bid you goodbye.